Hey, this is His Word Unveiled. Thanks for joining me, getting back with me. We are starting something new, hitting another book of the Bible. This is Ezekiel. So we're going to hang out in Ezekiel for quite a few videos. This is one that I honestly, just being real, have been dreading. There's so much in this that takes so much thought, and it'd be so easy to just skip over, read through, and be like, oh, that's cool, and continue on and not going deeper. But I know what Father has called me to do. So here we go. We're just going to do this. We're going to jump into this. We are not going to hesitate. We're not going to be reluctant. We're going to say, okay, God, you obviously have something to teach us. I'm in a position where I can't jump over. I can't get to the easy books of the Bible or the fun books of the Bible or however you want to label them. We're in Ezekiel. We're hitting this hard. We're letting God speak. We're going to grow. And purpose is going to drive us into beauty, into amazement, into deeper connection with the Lord. So I'm all about that. Whatever it takes, it's worth it. So here we go. What we're covering today is just the very first chapter of Ezekiel. One chapter, not too long, but there is so much in it. So as you read, take your time, and let me encourage you with this thing. As you read Ezekiel chapter 1, it lays out so descriptively this vision that Ezekiel has. So I encourage you to get a piece of paper, to get a pen or a pencil, write down, draw this out. Like, I'm not a drawer. My stick people even look atrocious. But draw this out, and every detail that you see, it will help you so that you won't skip over these like, oh yeah, that's nice, great vision. Here's this. I get a picture, an idea, a general idea of what's going on. Take your time, draw this out. It speaks very clearly. It gives descriptions of to the right or to the left, or whether it's on top or surrounds or beneath, or the colors and where things are located. It's so important for us to pick up on those things so that the Lord can take us deeper. So do that. I encourage you with that. Draw this out. Write and draw the details out so that you can best understand, so that God then can allow you to see it and take it wherever it needs to go. Take you wherever He has purposed for you to go with Him through the book of Ezekiel. So hang on tight. Do not succumb to the temptation of skipping over this book and jumping into another one. Stick with me. If you've walked through all of Isaiah and Jeremiah with me and all of just that judgment talk and all that, then you can do this. So let's keep trekking along. Let's keep pushing forward. Let's keep pressing in, leaning back to more of the Lord. Ezekiel chapter 1 will be our reading today. So go read, take your time, take notes, be intentional, listen to the voice of the Lord, and here we go. Lord, we love you, and I personally need you so much in this time. Lord, I believe that Ezekiel was given to us with such purpose. God, that your fingerprints are all over this book. Your heart is all over this book. Lord, meet us here. Speak to me. Pour out upon me and my weakness and my lack of understanding and my lack of even wanting to do this. Lord, meet me. And may it only be you. May it only be your spirit. May it only be your truth that we talk about, that we share, that we hear, that we see, that we continue to move deeper into. Lord, this has got to be about you. This has to be you all over this. So pour out. Father, open up your heavens upon us and pour out who you are and your truth in this. Lord, we love you and we long for you. We long for truth, the essence of truth, who you are. We desire to meet with you, to encounter you as our truth, as our revelation, as our strength. Lord, we love you and we trust you. It's got to be you. May we completely decrease, and may you be lifted up, increasing in all that you are. Lord, we love you. And I position myself in humility, just saying, Father, have your way. You be leading, you be speaking, you be teaching. I love you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, Ezekiel chapter 1. Read through, took me like 10 times, continually reading through this, trying to slow down, pray it through, worship my way through it, letting God just do whatever, letting God be who he is and leading us through this book. So let's get started. I'm excited as I am with this. I'm so excited because I know it's got to be God. And he gets so excited when we're in a position like this where we feel so weak, so, just insignificant, just unqualified, everything like that. So here we go. Okay, Ezekiel chapter 1. Now, the first 3 verses are hugely important where it gives us the time frame. It gives us when this is all taking place, when this has happened. Up to this point, we have talked all the way through to the destruction of Jerusalem. So we talked about the first siege of this Babylonian invasion coming up against Jerusalem. Then we talked about the second siege happening, and then we talked about this third siege happening, which led the rest of Jerusalem into captivity. So we've gone through there. We've talked about all of that, them being held captive. We've talked and went through Lamentations where there's this wailing and this mourning because of the condition that Jerusalem is in, because of God's people being in captivity, seeing all of this in ruins. We started from the very beginning, how it started. These sieges started, the wickedness just causing these things to happen, bringing on the judgment of the Lord all the way into captivity and mourning over it and seeing the land in ruins. So Ezekiel then hitting this kind of takes us back a little bit. So this takes us back to the second siege. So we read in the second, the second verse, verse 2, it says King Jehoiakim's exile. So that first siege took place when King Jehoiakim was king over Judah. That the siege came about, destruction, damage was done, and then some were taken into exile. Now at that time, during that first siege with King Jehoiakim being king over Judah, there were significant people who we will talk about later in the next couple books of the Bible that we hit, being Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael and Azariah, who we know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were all taken into captivity, taken away into exile in that first siege. So when that first siege took place with King Jehoiakim, then Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were taken in that first siege. Then Babylon, they lifted their siege. Remember, they heard Egypt coming, that whole shebang. Then they came back. That word of the Lord came and said, hey, don't think Egypt's sticking around to protect you. They're going back to their land, and don't think Babylon's not coming back, because they're coming back. And sure enough, they did, because what the Lord speaks, it's fulfilled. So that second siege then, Babylon came up against, and at this time, King Jehoiakim was king over Judah. And when Babylon came, they did some damage, caused some destruction, caused some chaos, and then they took some exiles with them back to Babylon. And that's where we're at here in this story when Ezekiel came to write this book, when he heard the word of the Lord coming to him. So we know it was King Jehoiakim's reign. As he was over Judah, it was part of this exile when King Jehoiakim was taken into captivity along with many other men, Ezekiel being one of them. So we see in verse 3, the word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel, the priest, son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans. So in the land, this word of the Lord came to him. This book was written while he was in captivity in the land of Babylon. It says, and there the hand of the Lord came upon him. So the Lord came upon him as he is there by this river in the land of Babylon, where the Lord comes to speak to him. Now, what's significant in this as well is that first verse. It says, now it came about in the 30th year. Now, we know clear way back at the beginning of the Old Testament where it lays out these rules, regulations, just even the petty stuff that we saw as insignificant, like when a priest would jump into priestly service, that was the age of 30. So Ezekiel was waiting, was living his life, and at 30, he was about to be priest then over and in Jerusalem. But at this time, in the 30th year of his life, he is taken into exile when he could have been priest. When finally everything he worked up and waited for and prepared for came to be, he was taken away and now in Babylon. So right when it was his time, when you've waited for something so long and it's about to happen, and then something falls apart for 30 years. For 30 years he was in this position. Now, hey, you can be priest. Oh, just joking. You're going to be taken away into Babylonian captivity. So that'll happen. The first 3 verses, we get an idea then of this time frame. So Ezekiel then is in Babylon with King Jehoiakim, who got taken away as well. And the word of the Lord comes upon Ezekiel. Now, this is crazy. When you were reading this, I mean, so detailed. And honestly, I don't know. I don't know if this is the longest, most detailed vision that's spoken in the Old Testament or throughout the Bible. I'm pretty sure. I feel like I can assume to say that it is. I mean, this is crazy. The first chapter gives nothing but this vision. And in such detail, like specific, so detailed through it all and where things were. And like I said, to take notes. Yeah, crazy, crazy, crazy. So here's this vision. Let's jump into this. Verse 4, it starts off. As I looked, behold, a storm wind was coming from the north. A great cloud with fire flashing forth continually and a bright light around it, and in its midst something like glowing metal in the midst of the fire. So right away, we see that Ezekiel sees this vision. He sees this storm coming, it says. So a storm wind coming from the north. From the north, not from the south, the west, the east. It was significant in the Lord allowing Ezekiel to see where the storm was coming from. Now, up until now, we've seen this idea of when God says from the north, he is speaking about an army or judgment, this that's coming up against them in judgment, coming up, against them just from the north. It's this idea of attack. It's this idea of punishment on its way to them from the north. That's where judgment's coming. And Ezekiel sees this storm, this great storm and wind that's coming from the north. And then it says this cloud, a great cloud with fire flashing forth continually and a bright light around it. So in this storm cloud, in this what is coming, there's fire flashing forth from it and there's light. It's glowing. It's looking like fire with fire flashing forth and bright light around it. In its midst, something like glowing metal in the midst of the fire. So there's a lot of lights. There's a lot of flashing, and it's this storm wind coming. Okay, continuing on then into verse 5. Within it, there were figures resembling 4 living beings. And this was their appearance. They had human form. So in the midst of this storm and these lights flashing and this glowing within it and this glowing around it, within this storm cloud coming from the north, Ezekiel sees 4 living beings. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of these things that have human form. We see in 6, each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. So here's a living being, and this thing has 4 faces and 4 wings. So there's 4 of those things that look like that. Verse 7, their legs were straight, and their feet were like a calf's hoof, and they gleamed like burnished bronze. This bright glowing metal, burnished bronze that were on these feet. And the feet were not human feet. They were in human form. And we see that, and we'll read here, but one of the faces, these 4 faces, was a human face in human form, and straight legs that had hooves like a calf. So not human feet. Even in this, we get this idea of why not a human foot? Why not a human foot? Why use a calf's foot in this description, in what Ezekiel is seeing in this kind of picture of these cherubim who were to be these angels? This cherubim is this vision that he's given, but so much more in this. So a calf's hoof, I'm like, why in the world? And you think a human foot, it's so designed to go one way, this natural way of moving. A calf's hoof calf's hoof is circular. And just giving off, like when I'm like, why in the world? Like what is the significance in this? What's the spiritual meaning in this? And just thinking that hoof, it's round. Thinking where it's not just designated as one way. Now, obviously, a cow, it's natural for them to move forward and not move to and on its side and back. But the roundness just screams this movement, this availability, this can going in all directions, this one kind of simple, orderly thing of what is planted then on the ground, what is moving, what is following. Okay, so straight legs, feet were like calves' hooves. Then it said in verse 8, under their wings on their four sides were human hands. So here's again of human hands. We see all this weird stuff, these straight legs, which means they're not bending on their knees, these calves' hooves, but this human form, these four wings, and now we see these human hands that come out from below these wings. Crazy, right? So hopefully you understood, like drawing this out, really piecing together all these parts helps tremendously. I have so many chicken scratches and drawings all on the side of my Bible. Okay, continuing on that in verse 9. Their wings touched one another. Their faces did not turn when they moved. Each went straight forward. As for the form of their faces, each had the face of a man, had the face of a lion on the right, and the face of a bull on the left, and all four had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each had two touching another being and two covering their bodies. So getting this picture of all this pieced together with all these body parts and these shapes and what looked human and what didn't, each of these four living beings, each of them had four faces. One a man, one a lion to the right, a bull to the left, and then an eagle's head. So significant, and even like why? Okay, why these four? Of all the faces that Ezekiel could have seen, why these four? And you start thinking the significance of all of these animals, why these animals and a man was chosen. The human face, you think we as humans, we were given just this being overseeing, being in charge, taking care of all of God's creation, superior in that and being over God's creation. Then you think the lion. So the lion head to the right, shoot, he's the king, like the king of the jungle, the king of all wild animals. Everyone knows the lion, like top dog, except it's a cat. Sorry, never mind. Okay, then we have the face of the bull. And that being the same thing, it is the strongest animal, the one with the most might of the domesticated animals. So we've got this strong king of the jungle lion of the wild animals, max might of these domesticated animals, and then the eagle, who is the king of the sky, reigning overseeing. I mean, these are all superior beings. Superior in their strength, in their might, in their just being above, in their sovereignty, in their power, in their being, in their rank. They are top notch. So Ezekiel seeing this, there's so much majesty, there's so much holiness, there's so much just an idea of, wow, this is important, these are significant, these hold power, there's so much in them, there's so much reverence coming from them. And in there, again, just all the details of everything else and how they are shaped with the human hands and the calf's feet, everything with it. And again, just it's saying that they didn't turn from the right or the left. Their faces did not turn when they moved, each moving straight forward. It's just this focus. It's just this order. There was nothing where they had to turn. It was just this movement in them with the four and these wings and all this steady, orderly, structured, intentional, focused, being so purposeful in what they were there for and what they were called to do and where they were called to go. So much of this direction and understanding and just obedience you sense in this vision that Ezekiel sees. Okay, so then we read in verse 11, their wings were spread out above. Each had two touching another being. So in these four beings, they weren't far away. They were close. Their wings were touching those two. And then it said, then two covering their bodies. So each had four. Two were spread out. Two were covering then their bodies. And each of these living beings with the four faces and these four wings, two were out. Two were covering their bodies. Verse 12, and each went straight forward. Whatever the Spirit was about to do, they would go, without turning as they went. In the midst of the living beings, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches darting back and forth from the living beings. The fire was bright, and lightning was flashing from the fire. And the living beings ran to and fro like bolts of lightning. So again, just this focus, this intention of just knowing what they were there for. And it said wherever the Spirit was about to go, they went. This alignment, this connection, this just knowing, this confidence, this getting it done, this purpose, this obedience, this steadiness in this, that Ezekiel is seeing this and seeing this glory, this majesty, all this craziness. I mean, this is weird stuff if you would see this. but in such reverence, with just going so much deeper and seeing the movement. The movement is what I picked up on this, just the movement, the steady movement. There's no chaos in this, even though they were moving like lightning bolts, just doing things with this in the middle of them and amongst them and their wings out. There was no chaos. It was just, though it was fast, it wasn't this rushed, chaotic kind of fast. It was this getting it done, just confidence, just boldly going forth, just moving with power, with such fierceness, and just, again, purpose is what you sense and see in this. Okay, verse 15. Now as I looked at the living beings, behold, there was one wheel on the earth beside the living beings for each of the four of them. The appearance of the wheels and their workmanship was like sparkling beryl, and all four of them had the same form, their appearance and workmanship being as if one wheel were within another. So we have this wheel that's gorgeous, that it's just a masterpiece, that the color is like sparkling beryl, it said. Then it said all four of them. So one wheel for each of the living beings, another wheel for this being. And it said that this one wheel with this sparkling beryl, there was like a wheel inside of it. So here's a wheel and then a wheel inside of it. This even, when I read this, I'm like, this just expresses the flexibility, the availability of the direction that this wheel can go in whatever direction, giving it another direction that it's not having to turn, but it just moves. It can move in whatever direction that the Spirit calls it to go, or that the Spirit is going, this naturally following after it, naturally moving with it. Verse 17, whenever they moved in any of the four directions without turning as they moved. So the wheel within could go in another direction. This steady, just restful kind of just purposeful movement where there was no jerking, there was no totally shifting and turning. It was just, here we are, standing firm, steadfast, not budging, just wherever it needed to go, just being moved in whatever direction it was called to go. Verse 18, as for their rims, so the rims around this wheel, they were lofty and awesome. And the rims of all four of them were full of eyes round about. Whenever the living beings moved, the wheels moved with them. And whenever the living beings rose from the earth, the wheels rose also. This alignment, this connection, this being so connected, so united as one. This takes me back to Numbers when we talked about the cloud. And when the Lord, the Spirit, this cloud would rise and the people would rise and they would march on. But when this cloud settled down, they would camp. They would just know it's this steady natural movement that, hey, if the Spirit is lifting up, then we're going to get up. If the Spirit starts speaking, then we're going to speak. If the Spirit is quiet and still and steady and just powerfully holding us, then we're going to remain in that stillness. It's just this alignment. It's just this going with the Spirit, naturally being moved, not thinking and desperately seeking out and striving. It's just, hey, when the Spirit moves, we're on it. We're so familiar with His voice that we're just on it. So we see this connection with the living beings and the wheels and how they're connected, how it flows, and how things are orchestrated and purposed and established and led and directed and moved by this powerful presence. And the rims, how they said lofty and awesome, that in the rims were all of these eyes, just speaking again of this power, this might, this omniscience, and seeing and knowing all things, that nothing is hidden, that they're moving according to just what needs done with this purpose, and in seeing and being aware. This, you just sense this awareness, this acknowledgement, this knowing, this not being shaken, not being caught off guard. Just these wheels moving in accordance with this majesty, with these living beings who just are exploding with just the majesty and glory of the Lord, and all of this, all that this is supposed to symbolize. So continuing on in verse 20, wherever the Spirit was about to go, they would go in that direction. And the wheels rose close beside them, for the Spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. Again, just this unity, this connection. Verse 21, whenever they went, these went. And whenever those stood still, these stood still. Again, this natural being one. not being a wheel and the living being. Just you get this, being one. They were together. Whatever the living beings did, the wheel was right there with it. It wasn't turning around saying, hey, follow us. Hey, do what we do. Hey, come in this direction. Here's where we're going. It's just when the living beings moved, when they were being moved, the wheel was just right with it. The same spirit. They were connected, united as one. Verse 21, whenever we totally just read that. Those stood still. We'll continue on in the middle of 21. And whenever those rose from the earth, the wheels rose closely beside them, for the spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. So it spoke that again, they were one. The beauty in this, the rest in this, the purpose in this, that they weren't chaotically trying to catch up. They weren't trying to speak and to turn around and try to instruct them to come. It was just that they knew. It was just that movement worked because they were united, because they came together, because there's this stronger force of this movement. There was something in this. There was so much, there was a supernatural, there was a divine something in this, and Ezekiel could see it, and he knew it, and he sensed it, and things were happening that were so the unknown, just deeper into just the divinity, just God and his presence, his glory of what was taking place, and how even in this movement, I couldn't get off this movement when I was reading this. Verse 22, now over the head of the living beings, there was something like an expanse, like the awesome gleam of crystal spread out over their heads. Under the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight, one toward the other. Each one also had 2 wings covering its body on the one side and on the other. I also heard the sound of their wings like the sound of abundant waters as they went, like the voice of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army camp. Wherever they stood, they dropped. Whenever they stood, they dropped their wings. And there came a voice from above the expanse that was over their heads. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. Okay, this was huge to me. I had to read this over and over again and really get this sunk into my spirit. This is beautiful. And I know there's so much more. Guys, I know, even going through this, there are people who know this stuff. They know so much more of this stuff. It's not important to know more than someone else or to know exactly where the Lord is taking someone else in this. It's so important to just listen to the voice of the Lord and to let him speak to you and reveal his truth to you. Personally, specifically to you. This is for you. Not just everyone all together in the same way. This is for you. This is for me to meet us with where you're at, for us to have those intimate encounters with the Lord. This is beautiful. There's so much more in this, but this is what the Lord spoke to me on. So it says now over the heads of the living beings. So we have these 4 living beings that, yes, look weird. It's crazy. It's like so not in this world of this world. So much higher, so much greater. So we have these living beings. Above these living beings, then Ezekiel sees this expanse like crystal, this beautiful, just all that's spread out above them, this expanse. Then it says underneath the expanse, they explain then the wings that are stretched out. Being stretched out, 2 of them, and then 2 covering the body like we talked about. Then it said in verse 24, I also heard the sound of their wings like the sound of abundant waters as they went. So as they're moving in this direction, how it says even within them, these flashes and these like torches that were darting back and forth. They were like bolts of lightning. They weren't turning. They were just moving in such steadiness with such purpose. And all of this movement, they talk about the sound. Ezekiel talks about the sound of their wings and how powerful it was, like the sound of abundant waters as they went, like the voice of the Almighty. So when these cherubim, when this vision, these living beings and these wheels, when they were moved, when they were instructed, when they were led, when they were being moved and brought about and shifted around and told to go by the Lord, there's just this higher, and we'll get to that and what Ezekiel sees even above this expanse. But in this, when they moved, when they were instructed to go, when they were being moved, their wings would sound like these abundant waters, like the voice of the Almighty, it says in verse 24, that you could hear the Lord because of the instruction, because of the connection, because of the unity with these living beings, the wheel, with the Lord himself, with Almighty God, with all of this and all the characteristics of God and the majesty and the glory of God in this vision. Because of all of that, the voice of the Almighty was heard by their moving with him, according to what the Lord is speaking, according to where they were purposed to go, instructed to go. The voice of the Almighty was heard. The voice of the Almighty. It wasn't the strength of these wings. It was what was moving these wings, was breathing life into these wings, what it really meant, what it really stood for. It was the voice of the Almighty that was heard when these wings were out, when they were being moved. But then in verse 25, and there came a voice from above the expanse that was over their heads. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. And we see even at the end of verse 24, whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. So when they were being moved, instructed to go and called out, sent somewhere, it would be the voice of the Almighty. In their obedience, the voice of the Almighty. In their being led into God's righteousness, the voice of the Almighty was heard. But when they stood still, when they weren't moving, when they stood still, they dropped their wings. They were out and they were moving, and it was the roaring of the voice of the Almighty. But when they stood still, their wings dropped. And it says in that then, in verse 25, and there came a voice. When their wings dropped, there came a voice from above the expanse. So we have these living beings, this expanse, and it says a voice came from above the expanse. A voice came. Mind you, when they were being moved, when they were following after his righteousness, following his lead in glory and his majesty, you could hear the voice of the Almighty. Then when they stood still, they heard a voice coming from above. This voice of the Almighty was heard in their wings and their obedience and their living and breathing and tasting and seeing God, being united with him. The voice of the Almighty was heard as they were moving, as they were going and being directed and together in this alignment, in this rest, in this power. In all that, the voice of the Almighty was heard. But then when they stood, when they weren't even going and moving and doing, when they weren't even doing and they stood still and their wings dropped, that thing that was the voice, the sound of the voice of the Almighty, when they dropped, then the voice from above, the voice of the Almighty, then was still heard. There came a voice from above the expanse that was over their heads. Then in verse 26, now above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne, beautiful in appearance, clear and sparkling and gorgeous in appearance. And on that which resembled a throne, high up was a figure with the appearance of a man. So get this. This is spoken when they are still, and this voice, it brings out this voice that's heard above the expanse. So when they were still, they let their wings down and the voice of the Lord was heard. Our strength does not come from those wings. Our strength comes from our listening, from our being familiar with his voice, connecting and aligning ourselves with his voice, being one with him. And this voice then, it brings about this picture where this voice is coming from. And Ezekiel says, so he sees the living beings, this expanse, and then above this expanse, above these things that symbolize such greatness, again, all of these are like top dogs of their rank. We've got a human that God again created to be over all his creation, this lion, king of all the wild animals, this bull, such strength of the domesticated animals. Then the eagle who soars above, everything's covered. These high, majestic, powerful kings of these animals. And Ezekiel sees that which is higher, that which is above, that which is the one responsible of giving this kingship to these animals, giving this strength, giving this power, that what is above superior power is a superior power that is so out of this world, that is so much higher than we can even fathom. So Ezekiel sees above this expanse this throne that's beautiful, and one sitting on it with the appearance of a man, it says at the end of verse 26. Then in 27, that I noticed from the appearance of his loins and upward, something like glowing metal that looked like fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his loins downward, I saw something like fire. and there was a radiance around him. So his loins and upward, something like glowing metal that looked like fire all around within it. So from loins up, this glowing metal, this burned, this bronzed, glowing, powerful light, all around and within it. It said from loins up. That's what Ezekiel sees. But this appearance of a man in this, with this glowing, with this glowing metal that appears as fire, and all around it, within it, it's consumed, it's wrapped, it's so powerful and bright. Then from the loins and down, something like fire, he said. So this is glowing. This is bright. This is a light. This is crazy. This is glorious. This is majestic, what Ezekiel is seeing. And then there's a radiance around him. So that was what Ezekiel saw. That was the appearance of man, yet all this glowing, all this like fire, all this light, and then a radiance even around him, around all that looks like fire and just this glowing. Verse 28 then, as the appearance of the rainbow in the sky, in the clouds on a rainy day, so is the appearance of the surrounding radiance. This is a radiance that surrounded him, that surrounded the one whose voice was heard above the expanse, speaking when they were still. When they were still, this voice was heard, that they were becoming familiar with the voice and knew the voice because of their connection with him. Because when the Lord said move and led them, they were moving. They were one. They were united. So that when they were moving, the voice of the Almighty was heard. When they were still, the voice of the Almighty was heard. And the appearance of what Ezekiel sees, the appearance of one sitting above this throne, high above all that these superior beings were. As the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so is the appearance of the surrounding radiance. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking. I love that Ezekiel saw so much. He saw these beings. He saw this wheel with the eyes. He saw the wings. He heard the voices and the noises of this. He saw the beautiful expanse. He saw all of these amazing things. And we see at the end that when he sees this one sitting on the throne, looking, just lighting up, glowing, this radiance surrounding him, even in his radiance within him, that it says, and when I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking. Again, this voice that is heard when we listen, when we tune in, when we're focused, when we choose to be aligned, when we choose to be in connection with the Lord, we hear his voice. And that voice takes us to our knees. That voice overwhelms us. That voice leads us into righteousness, into this peace. He leads us into still waters. He leads us into being still. So we just see and experience so much more. When I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking. We have got to choose to see what God has for us and to see deeper, to go deeper, so that we continue to hear the voice of the Lord speaking and leading and directing and just being and whispering our names to us. Just this powerful, reckless love that he comes after us with, desiring for us to see and feel and hear and just be connected and aligned with him. So ridiculous. Okay, so in all of this vision, just recapping really what this means, what this does for us, the points that we can pick out. Let's see, we see then clear back at the beginning when it talks about coming from the north, that Ezekiel starts off seeing this storm from the north, that the Lord is over this calamity that's coming from the north. All this that is coming. Mind you, that the captivity, that all this destruction, it has not taken place. So Ezekiel is getting this word that yes, he has been taken into exile, into captivity with King Jehoiakim. This is after the second siege. But the destruction of Jerusalem, it has not taken place. That destruction takes place that in 586 BC. This took place in 597 BC. So this is way before. There's years before this takes place, and Ezekiel sees us that this calamity that will come, God is showing this that is coming, It's of the Lord. The Lord, this is this vision that he saw in all this majesty and this glory. This is the Lord coming from the north. This is his hand on this, bringing about this judgment to be. And in this, how encouraging this must have been that Ezekiel gets this word saying, hey, in this calamity, all that's going on, even you being in Babylon right now, not being able to be priest over Jerusalem when it was finally your time, in all of this and what is yet to come, I'm in this and there's purpose in this and I'm coming. I'm coming in my majesty. I'm coming with my salvation. I'm coming with restoration. I am coming in purpose for my people, in the glory of the Lord, as Ezekiel just saw in this incredible vision as one, and these cherubim being directed and led and moved in this alignment, this connection, and what this is, and showing above all that God is sovereign, that God is above. And that's another thing that we can pick up on this vision, just the sovereignty of the Lord, sovereign in all that even is lifted up, all that is brought up, that you can even take this to, hey, Nebuchadnezzar is being lifted up. Nebuchadnezzar is being this top dog, being in control. But God says, even when Nebuchadnezzar has got you, even as he has you in exile and he's going after more, he's bringing more into exile, even in his doing this and reigning and ruling, God is saying, I'm sovereign. Me up on this throne that you see high above this expanse, above these living beings, I'm sovereign. I hold all of this. I hold all power. I see this. Going back to those wheels, I see this. I'm omniscient. In my omniscience, I'm coming. In my omnipotence, I'm coming. In who I am, that I'm fully capable of doing this, and I'm coming with purpose. I'm coming for a reason. This is happening for a reason. So trust me, and being your sovereign God, and being your righteous God, and being who I am. Okay, we can also see just the humanness connected with the divine. You know, you see what Ezekiel saw in this vision so much in human form, with this human face. You saw the human hands, yet you see the calves' feet. You see the other faces of these animals. There's this beautiful mix. This is what I picked up on, just seeing this beautiful mix. This is what the Lord spoke to me and personally, this mix of humanness and the divine. That God says, no, there's access, there's a connection, there's an alignment, there's purpose with this. There's purpose in you being here on earth and us not being able to tap fully into this spiritual realm, to the spiritual world that's going on around us. But God is saying there is access. You can be aligned, you can be in tune with me so that you can see with spiritual eyes. That you can see these miracles that I am doing. You can know what I am up to. You can trust me in my sovereignty and in the power that I hold, that I can come down and make anything happen. That there's full access that we have into the heart of God, into these spiritual things, into the spiritual mysteries of the Lord, and being so close to his holy heart, that he is God. That he is God, and he brings us into relationship with him in his holiness, in his majesty. This connection, this is what I saw when Ezekiel is speaking these, and so much humanness, yet so much craziness, this so much unknown, so much of this not of this world. That's beautiful. There's power in that, and we have got to be aware and acknowledge the access that we have into as much of the Lord as we desire. You know, we all get these images of what heaven's going to be. We have no clue. We can't even grasp the fear of the Lord, to fear him, to revere him, to be completely overwhelmed by these kind of visions. What is really going to be in heaven around his throne, how big he will be, how that will overwhelm us. It's not going to be all this just fluffy, nice stuff that we see that's beautiful here, that's glorious here. Like a sunset. Heaven, the most spectacular sunset is not going to touch the beauty that heaven holds. These visions of this wheel with eyes, that's creepy. This vision with these living beings like lightning bolts with four faces and all these wings and these weird legs, like this is real stuff. And there's power and majesty in these things. We can't limit our mind. We can't use our earthly minds and think that we've got it all figured out. We have no clue what this is going to look like, what this is about. What we do know is that we have access into knowing God and knowing the fullness of him. Just going deeper with him and opening up our minds and our hearts to be willing to be overwhelmed by him, by a holy God, to truly be available to see miracles, even if they don't make sense, even if we have no clue what's going on and that it seems weird. God is in this, and his Spirit wants to take over and overwhelm us and take us into the unknown, in the unseen, in the undiscovered. God is saying, here it is. Okay, we saw again just the unity and the power of unity with the Spirit, the wheel and the Spirit of the living beings just being connected and rising and just moving in this beautiful movement of togetherness and unity. Another thing, and another point, surrounded in the promises of God at the end there, and talking about this, the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. So is the appearance of the surrounding radiance that went around the Lord. This being surrounded by the promises of God, this rainbow, symbolizing the promise of God when he came into covenant with his people, and not saying, hey, you have to do this for me to give this rainbow. No, he just gave it. He just painted it. He said, here's my promise. It's a symbol of the promises of God, the goodness of God, and how he is surrounded in this. Just allowing Ezekiel to see, we can stand on the promises of God. That's the radiance. That's the glory. That's part of this connection and relationship that we have with the Lord. Another point, his majesty and glory and holiness is present even in captivity. That Ezekiel is seeing this, fully aware that of what's going on, that destruction has taken place. There's been some damage. There's been some things that haven't been so fun, that he's now in Babylon, but the glory and majesty is there. There are purposes there, that God knows what he's doing. He's got a plan, and he is for our good. He is fighting for us. He is moving and doing whatever it takes to draw us into real life with him. There's so much that we can see. So much that we can learn by this crazy vision that Ezekiel had. This first chapter is packed full, and I'm going so long. This video is almost up to 47 minutes. But this is good stuff, and it's so important to take our time to really look and to dive in and to hear the voice of the Lord. I love the emphasis on hearing the voice of the Lord, the sound of the Almighty. Guys, when we obey, when we move in the Lord, aligned with his Spirit, in that movement, in that obedience, the voice of the Almighty is heard. It's not us. Not that we're not lifted up to be seen or heard. It's not about people saying, oh, you're so great, you did so well, you're doing this and that. The voice of the Almighty is heard. He is seen. He is heard. That's what it's about. When we're moving in everything we do, everything we put our hands to, everything we speak, every place we go, the voice of the Almighty should be heard. He should be seen. His name should be lifted on high. And in our stillness, the voice of the Almighty is still heard. And we hear it clearly. And that is the voice, that is the power that drives us into that movement where the voice of the Almighty is heard, surrounding us and by all those around us. The voice of the Almighty. And again, finishing up this chapter, the very last line, and when I saw it, when he saw the Lord surrounded in his radiance and who he is above all, sitting on that throne above everything else that he saw. When I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking. That God speaks to us when we position ourselves to hear him. That is the most beautiful kind of heavy. That chapter is so legit. Okay, so I'm just trusting that is sinking in your spirit. God's just going to keep taking this and taking us deeper into this. That's just the first chapter of Ezekiel. So let's get further. Let's go deeper. Let's get into more. Cannot wait for what he has for us specifically in the book of Ezekiel. I can't wait. Thank you so much for walking this through with me. I'll see you soon on my next video.